So, this is reflection on what happened in the Oval Office yesterday from multiple perspectives. We're just trying to get a full understanding of what's happened. I have my thoughts, you probably have yours. And I was kind of shocked when how other people interpreted this. Newspapers this morning, the Times called it a meltdown in the Oval Office. The Sun called it the Fight House instead of the White House. So, yeah, and I've never seen anything quite like this. In all my years watching, and I've been paying attention even since I was a child to what was going on. I mean, it was kind of nerdy of me, but I thought it was interesting, right? I remember the Reagan years pretty clearly. Reagan, Bush, Clinton, all the way through. I don't remember anything quite like this where a president or dignitary from another country is berated like that. It was kind of Trump's, and it was a political version of this, but like that Afghanistan moment that looks so bad where the U.S. Army and Air Force is getting out of Afghanistan and like just people are falling off the planes. It's kind of like a political version of that. I felt like this Elmo character when I was watching this yesterday, like, what on earth am I watching? How is this happening? And yeah. Now, some will say that President Macron and Keir Starmer were able to go to the White House and have a perfectly pleasant conversation with Trump, and they really did. Now, you can't tell me that, like, let's say just Macron, like Starmer's on the liberal side of the spectrum. He's far to the left, Trump's far to the right. And so they're not going to agree on numerous things, but they weren't talking about those things. And same thing with Macron. Like Macron's probably even further from Trump on multiple things. But Macron threaded that needle really well and just focused on those things. Now, his country is also not under attack. And so if I'm giving Zelensky a pass if he didn't do something well, in my estimation of like didn't hold up. But I don't think Zelensky was the problem either. I think that there was an attitude going into it about Zelensky that kind of was provoking what was happening. So I'm not going to say, well, if he only did what Macron, like Anders Puck Nielsen, I'm going to talk about him in a little bit. He say like I wouldn't say that if he was just like Macron, everything would have went well. I'll talk about why he said that in just a little bit. Okay, so here we are in the Oval Office. Zelensky says Putin broke the ceasefire. He killed our people. He didn't engage. What kind of diplomacy are you speaking about? Apparently, that's the inflammatory language, which I didn't find inflammatory because it was more like, can you clarify this? Okay, let's just listen to a little bit of this. J.D. Vance is going on and on about, we tried, the Biden administration tried the military route. We're going to try diplomacy.
Invaded Ukraine and destroyed a significant chunk of the country. The path to peace and the path to prosperity is maybe engaging in diplomacy. We tried the pathway of Joe Biden of thumping our chest and pretending that the President of the United States' words mattered more than the President of the United States' actions. What makes America a good country is America engaging in diplomacy. That's what President Trump is doing.
Can I ask you?
Sure.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. So he occupied our parts, big parts of Ukraine, parts of East.
I'm going to skip a little bit ahead.
So a lot of years. So I'm not speaking about just Biden, but those times, Obama, then President Biden, now President Trump, and God bless, now President Trump will stop him. But during 2014...
So far, I mean, I don't understand what he did wrong here. And God bless, President Trump will stop him.
Nobody stopped him. He just occupied and took. He killed people. You know what the contact
2015.
Yeah.
2014.
Trump is making sure that he wasn't to blame.
The situation the same. The people have been dying on the contact line. Nobody, and we signed with him. Signed with him with gas contract.
And he says you signed 25 yes, times. He's broken the agreement.
Prisoners. We signed the exchange of prisoners, but he didn't do it. What kind of diplomacy, JD, you are speaking about? What?
That's the thing that's so inflammatory, and I don't understand how that's inflammatory. This seems like a reasonable conversation, unless you're reading into him that he's so mean. How could you possibly say that and be so disrespectful? I don't see it as disrespectful.
Yeah, what do you mean?
I'm talking about the kind of diplomacy that's going to end the destruction of your country.
Yes, but if you
Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media. Right now, you guys are going around.
Yeah, I just don't see what was disrespectful about anything that he said. Okay, let's look at some other commentary, because Rubio was holding this up, and I just thought, Rubio, really? What specifically do you want Zelensky to apologize for turning this into a fiasco? How did he do that?
What specifically do you want to see President Zelensky apologize for?
Well, apologize for turning this thing into the fiasco for him that it became. There was no need for him to go in there and become antagonistic. Look, this thing went off the...
Okay, and that's true. And what I was just saying here earlier, like, they didn't make it antagonistic, but I don't think that Zelensky made it antagonistic. I think J.D. Vance was perhaps the one that was a little bit too antagonistic in the way that he saw things. But I don't think what he said, correct me if I'm wrong, put it in the comments below, show me what you think. So I'm not sure what he's talking about, that when Rubio is talking about it, it became antagonistic. Let's listen to just a little bit more, and then we'll go to the Secretary of Treasury.
You were there, I believe. It went off the rails when he said, let me ask you a question to the Vice President. What kind of diplomacy are you talking about?
Well, you heard it. I mean, did that sound antagonistic to you?
Well, this is a serious thing. I mean, thousands of people have been killed, thousands. And he talks about all these horrible things that have happened to prisoners of war and children, all true, all bad. This is what we're dealing with here. It needs to come to an end. We are trying to bring it to an end. The way you bring it to an end is you get Russia to the table to talk. And he understands that attacking Putin, no matter how anyone may feel about him personally, forcing the president into a position where you're trying to goad him into attacking Putin, calling him names.
Yeah, I just don't see that he was forcing the president into goading names, but maybe calling names. Maybe I'm wrong. Okay, this is Secretary of the Treasury talking about how you don't negotiate with the president of the United States in public like this. Yes, this kind of thing shouldn't happen. And everything leading up to that last question was perfectly fine and genial. And okay.
David, you don't do a negotiation with the President of the United States in public like this. That we were scheduled to have lunch afterwards, and that perhaps he could have brought up some of the points. Instead, he chose to let things go into a downward spiral on worldwide television. And, again, I keep coming back.
So there was a spiral on worldwide television. But I'm having a hard time blaming Zelensky here. I'm trying to understand what was so offensive by what diplomacy you're talking, that Putin broke the agreement 25 times. What diplomacy are you talking about? I just don't see that as offensive, but okay. Here it is on Fox News with this is bringing in the former Secretary of State.
Pompeo, President Trump's former Secretary of State, former head of the CIA, and Fox News contributor. Great to have you with us today. So your reaction to what we saw, sir?
Well, Martha, it's great to be with you. That is quite unusual in one sense. It's unusual in the sense of this played out in public, but I've seen many, many tough conversations with world leaders. I've been part of them.
Yeah. So that was really the key, that this came out in public. Had they had this conversation in the back room, that would have been a thing that would have been okay. But it just spiraled out of control in front of the cameras. Okay. Now, there are different takes on this. So this person is saying once you take time to look at the entire thing, it becomes clear this wasn't a setup. Trump was genuine about the deal. J.D. Vance is a traitor that instigated this fight. Perhaps. But then you also have other views, and this is Anders Puck Nielsen. He makes a pretty compelling argument that this was intended. It was set in order to do this very thing, because it doesn't look like Trump actually has a real plan for how to do this. And so Zelensky is going to get blamed for this. And maybe that's true. I don't know. I know that I respect Anders' analysis, but I just don't know what it is. Okay. This is a conservative that's regularly on CNN, and I agree with him about a lot of things. I don't agree with him here. Listen.
I don't know if he needs an apology. He needs Zelensky to recognize the position that he's in.
Which to you is what?
We're their patron. We're their best hope for the killing to stop and for them to emerge from this sovereign and prosperous.
Okay, so far I agree with that yes, the United States has been their patron.
And we're also their best hope as a business partner. I mean, all Zelensky had to do today was put on a tie, show up, smile, say thank you, sign the papers, and have lunch. That's it. And he couldn't do that. And this followed.
And that's all true. But what did he do exactly? I can't quite pinpoint where Zelensky was creating the problem. Yes, they got themselves into a system that creates a problem when they started arguing. But how did it looks like Vance was the one that was just wanting to push.
10 days of being difficult in private, and now 1 day of being stupid in public.
Okay, so that 10 days of being difficult in private, yeah, there were some words back and forth, and so that has been the backdrop to it, and that was probably rankling both parties involved before.
This did not have to go down this way.
Okay.
And however you feel about why it started, why it's going on, who's right and who's wrong, we can help them in this and come out okay on the other side, and he's making it hard.
Now, first of all,
okay, but Zelensky, in his defense, felt like he couldn't just swallow J.D. Vance's assumptions, and he was trying, I think, gently trying to push back against it, but it became a thing. Okay, here's John Bolton, former what Mike Waltz is to President Trump right now. He was in that particular role for Donald Trump.
Is Vladimir Putin capable of sticking to a deal?
You know, when it's in Russia's interest, he will, and when it's not in Russia's interest, he won't. Ronald Reagan must be turning over in his grave that an American president can say, yeah, I'll trust Vladimir Putin. Trump said a few days ago that he says he wants peace, and I believe him. Well, of course he wants peace. He wants peace. He also wants all of Ukraine. It's embarrassing that we're being led into these negotiations by that kind of attitude.
Look, Donald Trump has said he wants the killing to stop. That was something that was very popular on the campaign trail. He wants this war to end. Wars end normally with an agreement. Very rare do we get unconditional surrender. The Ukrainians aren't going to surrender unconditionally. The Ukrainians are not going to beat Russia and kick Russia out of the eastern part of Ukraine. We'll put up the maps right now. So there is a deal to be had, right? Generally agreed upon terms would be something along the lines of Russia gets some of the land in the east. There are some kind of meaningful security guarantees. And then ... there may be some type of peacekeeping arrangement. What is a deal that is reasonable that could be had in your mind, a fair deal, that's also possible that all three people could agree to?
Well, I think it's very unlikely. You know, the Ukrainians are the ones whose territory has been invaded. They're the victims of the invasion. They're the ones that are dying to defend their territory. So I'm glad Mr. Humanitarian Donald Trump cares about the loss of life. You might ask the people who have been brutalized by the aggressors, if they're still willing to fight, what problem do we have with that? And if Putin's still willing to kill his own people and his own people are unable or unwilling to do something about it, I don't know what our role is there. If Trump doesn't want to be an interventionist, he seems very intent on intervening. And
yeah, so that's a pretty classic conservative answer. This is a Reagan-esque conservative type of response. Look, I know you want to make peace, but they want to fight to defend their own land. Let them fight. And so, okay, so that's where John Bolton is. This comment I thought was really interesting too. Most of you are too emotional to read the geopolitical room in 2025. Thus, you'll become a victim of your own emotions, constructing a fake reality and believing what feeds them instead of seeing and facing the reality the way it is. And the reality is brutal, really brutal. Now, she doesn't say what the reality is, but I think there's something to it. It's almost like a Rorschach test. You know what Rorschach is? Like Rorschach is the ink blot test, and like, what is this? What do you see here? And 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 how you answer it tells you a lot about what you tells the psychologist a lot about where your mental state is. Okay, Ben Hodge is saying, I can barely watch the reporting anymore. So embarrassing for our country. What happened today in the Oval Office did nothing to advance America's strategic interest. That's right. We should have been keeping our eyes on the prize about, like, how do we move forward? It did the opposite. Our allies see the administration siding with Russia. China sees it too. That's right. And here, H.R. McMaster also formerly worked for Trump in his cabinet. It is impossible to understand why President Trump and Vice President Vance seem determined to put more pressure on Zelensky while they seem to be coddling Putin. Like, I don't understand that. The person who inflicted this terrible war in Ukraine. I mean, Zelensky's trying desperately, and I don't see how he was the instigator of this. Now, there were some funny things that people put as like little memes with this, taking the language and putting a poker table because they were talking about, hey, you don't have the cards. I thought this was, I'm trying to lift the mood a little bit because this is a pretty bad scene.
You're right now not in a very good position. You've allowed yourself to be in a very bad position, and he happens to be right about it.
From the very beginning of the war.
You're not in a good position. You don't have the cards right now. You're right.
Okay, so somebody's taking that and overlaying a casino table. There's an overlay of a risk board where people are playing risk.
You're right now not in a very good position. You've allowed yourself to be in a very bad position, and he happens to be right about it.
From the very beginning of the war.
You're not in a good position. You don't have the cards right now.
Yeah, so, I mean, that was kind of humorous that somebody came up with that. And then this was AI generated where Zelensky's attacking Trump. And, yeah. So anyway, I mean, that's where people are thinking about things. Okay, so that's where we are. Tell me what you think about this. I think a mature reflection, I can see how people can think that Zelensky did something, but I don't think that he actually did. I think that the only way that you get there is that you have a worse interpretation than what actually happened. And if you put the best face on each other, it was just asking questions. Anyway, tell me what you think about it. Put it in the comments below. Thank you for your time, the likes and the shares and the subscribes. And thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.